For a long time, Earth had been quiet in the galaxy. Other civilizations looked at it and shook their heads. They called it a broken world. They said humans fought too much among themselves, wasted their strength in endless arguments, and would never rise beyond their little blue planet. For the great empires of the stars, Earth was nothing but a forgotten corner, a place too small to matter. That silence lasted for centuries, but silence is never the same as weakness. Beneath the surface, humans struggled, endured, and prepared in ways no one could see. They had learned how to suffer. They had learned how to stand again after every fall. The galaxy mistook patience for helplessness. It was the oldest mistake anyone could make. The storm came with the Skal Dominion. The Skal were not explorers, not builders, not dreamers. They were conquerors. Their fleets stretched across the stars like endless black clouds. They had crushed world after world, their warships blotting out skies, their soldiers marching through ashes. To them, Earth was only another name on the list, another weak planet to enslave, another place to burn. They came without warning. From the night skies over Europe to the deserts of Africa, from the cities of Asia to the forests of South America, their war machines descended. Towers of fire fell from the sky. Buildings shook and crumbled. Millions screamed. Mothers clutched children. Fathers shouted in terror, and everywhere people asked the same question: why us? The invaders did not answer. In the great halls of their flagship, the Scale warlords laughed. This planet is nothing, they said. Its people are soft. Its weapons are toys. Its skies will be ours before their sun sets again. They had no fear, no doubt, no respect for the ones they came to destroy, but they were wrong. Earth was not like other worlds. Humans had been born in struggle. From the first fire in the caves to the first ship crossing oceans, their story had been one of pain, endurance, and stubborn hope. They had fought each other for centuries, it was true, but in that fighting they had learned something no empire understood: how to survive the impossible. As the Skal warlords feasted, as their armies tore across the land, something moved deep beneath Earth's surface. In hidden bases carved under mountains, in bunkers sealed for generations, lights flickered on. Old plans were dusted off. Commands were spoken in voices that shook with anger and grief. The strike wings were unleashed. They were not fleets of shining starships like the empires built. They were not massive dreadnoughts with shields and cannons the size of cities. They were small, fast, and sharp, jets forged from human hands carrying human rage. Each one was piloted not by soldiers of duty alone, but by men and women who had lost everything. Fathers who had buried children, daughters who had seen mothers die, lovers who had kissed for the last time before climbing into cockpits. When the first strike wings launched, the night sky of Earth lit up. Engines roared, trails of fire cut across the stars, and hearts across the planet lifted. Humanity was not broken. Humanity was not defeated. The Skal saw them and sneered. Scraps of metal bound with fire, they mocked. To their eyes, these machines were nothing. To their minds, these pilots were already dead. But then the battle began. The strike wings did not fight like the Skal expected. They did not line up in neat formations or march blindly into the teeth of war. They moved like hunters, darting in and out of fire, weaving through plasma storms, striking from angles no machine could predict. Each wing became a storm of its own, each pilot a force of vengeance. And for the first time in centuries, the Skal Dominion bled. Warlords who had never known fear saw their ships torn apart by machines they had called primitive. Soldiers who had marched proud through burning cities now screamed in terror as fire rained upon them from the sky. Above the shattered Earth, a new sound echoed through the stars. The sound of humanity refusing to die. The silence was over. The storm had begun. The first battle of Earth's strike wings spread shockwaves through the stars. For the Skal Dominion, it was supposed to be a hunt, nothing more. They had expected frightened prey. Instead, they found teeth. But still they did not fear. On their flagships, the warlords laughed. To them, the human craft were nothing but sparks in the dark. They looked like toys, Scraps of iron pushed by fire, tiny darts against their towering warships. The scale had ruled the galaxy for centuries. They had fought species far older, far richer, far greater in number, and yet none had stood against them. Why would Earth, a small and fractured world, be different? But difference is what humans had always been. The scale expected order. They expected their enemies to fight in lines, to obey rules of war that had existed for thousands of years. Humans did not fight that way. They were chaos given wings. Strike pilots twisted their jets between cannon fire, rolled into impossible dives, and vanished into clouds of smoke before appearing again like ghosts. The scale commanders, sitting safe behind walls of armor, frowned when their sensors failed to track the human wings. Their ships fired where the fighters should have been, but every time the humans were already gone. They struck not at the strongest points but at the weakest: engines, vents, exposed power cores. They struck and disappeared before the Dominion even knew they had been touched. And for the first time, scale warships exploded not in triumph, but in shame. The laughter of the warlords faltered. Some shouted in anger. Some cursed their soldiers. Others refused to believe what their own eyes showed them. "Impossible," they cried. "No primitive world can wound us. No child race can defy us." But the wreckage floating in orbit told another story. Below, on Earth, the people watched the skies with tears in their eyes. They saw the trails of fire as strike wings rose, and they prayed with every heartbeat. Families huddled in basements. Children clutched old photographs, and the elderly whispered the names of pilots they had never met but already loved. Every jet that returned became a symbol of hope. Every one that did not became a memory carved into the soul of humanity. The price of this defiance was heavy. Each battle took lives in numbers too great to count. Pilots went up knowing their chances of return were thin. Some whispered goodbye to recordings that would never be heard. Others carried letters tucked into their uniforms, letters that would reach families only after their wings burned to ash. Yet not a single pilot turned away. They knew what was at stake. This was not a war of land or riches. This was a war of survival. Either Earth stood or Earth vanished from the galaxy forever. The Skyle, blind in their arrogance, thought humans fought for glory. They thought humanity fought for the same reasons as empires: power, thrones, and conquest. They could not understand what it meant to fight, because you have no choice. They could not understand the fire of desperation, the unbreakable spirit of a people who refused to kneel. It was that spirit that turned the tide. The strike wings fought not only in Earth's skies but far beyond. They followed Skyle fleets into asteroid belts, ambushed them in nebula clouds, and attacked supply convoys in the dark of space. The humans hunted. They became the shadows that the Skyle could not shake, the predators that struck when least expected. Again and again, Dominion ships fell. Flagships that had once been symbols of terror now drifted broken, their hulls torn apart by wings that should never have been a threat. In the Dominion's courts, whispers began. Advisors dared to speak of trouble on Earth. Soldiers who had once marched proudly now told stories of human fire that could not be escaped. Warlords who had never bent their heads to anyone began to argue, to fear, to doubt. And still, the strike wings flew. In every pilot's heart was the memory of loss, of children buried in rubble, of homes reduced to dust, of families scattered in the wind. Every flight was a promise: you will not take more. You will not break us. You will not win. The galaxy had thought Earth was silent, broken, and weak. Now they began to see the truth. Silence was never weakness. It was the gathering of a storm. And that storm was breaking upon the scale with relentless fury. The invaders laughed no more. They began to fear. Every victory came with a wound. Every triumph carried a shadow. Humanity's strike wings were relentless, but the cost was written in blood. When a pilot rose into the sky, the people on the ground knew what it meant. Families gathered to watch them launch, faces turned upward, eyes full of pride and fear. They clapped, they shouted blessings. They whispered prayers into the night. But deep in their hearts they also knew many of those wings would never return. The scale warships were vast and cruel. Even when struck, even when burning, they could take human fighters with them. A single blast of plasma could turn a pilot into ash before their name was even spoken. And yet every day new pilots stepped forward. Young men and women barely out of school, veterans who had once sworn never to fight again. Even those who had already lost everything. They all came. Because for them, there was no other choice. In underground hangars, the air was heavy with silence before each mission. Pilots strapped themselves into cockpits with steady hands even when their hearts shook. Some carried small tokens, a wedding ring tied to a string, a child's drawing taped to the console, a worn photo of parents long gone. These things were not just memories. They were promises. Promises to fight until the end. Promises that Earth would not fall. When a jet did not return, the loss was felt not just by one family but by all. Villages mourned together. Cities held silent vigils under darkened skies. Names of the fallen were painted on walls, carved into stone, whispered into the wind. Humanity wept, but humanity did not break. The grief only hardened their will. The Skyle warlords did not understand. To them, death was weakness. They believed the humans would tire, that sorrow would smother their fire. They thought the rivers of tears would drown the fight from Earth. But the opposite was true. Each loss fed the storm. Each death carved a deeper mark into the hearts of the living. The pilots knew they were dying faster than they could be replaced. And still they flew. Still they fought. Still they hunted. And the galaxy began to notice. Worlds that had once bowed to the scale watched with wide eyes as human jets streaked across the stars. They saw species that should have been crushed standing tall, striking back again and again. They saw people who did not fight for power or conquest but for survival. For love, for family, for the right to breathe free. It was different. It was terrifying. Among the scale themselves, whispers grew louder. Soldiers began to fear the very sight of human wings. They spoke of pilots who never gave up, of jets that returned from fire when they should have been destroyed, of hunters who chased them into the deepest void. The fear spread faster than fire, eating at the empire from the inside. But fear did not stop the blood. For the families on Earth, the price was endless. A mother would watch her son's fighter vanish into the clouds and know she might never hear his voice again. A little girl would clutch a communicator, waiting for her father's promise to come home only to hear static instead. Lovers kissed one last time in the hangar shadows, whispering words they were too afraid to repeat, knowing those words might be their last. The world was scarred. Cities became ruins. Streets became graves. The sky itself seemed heavy with sorrow. But within that sorrow burned something greater, defiance, because Earth had decided they would not surrender. No matter how many tears fell, no matter how many names were carved into stone, no matter how many thrones trembled in fear of them, humanity would keep flying, keep fighting, keep rising. The strike wings were no longer just machines of war. They had become symbols, legends, and warnings. Every pilot who died became part of that legend. Every family who wept turned grief into iron. Every victory, no matter how small, told the galaxy one truth: humanity could not be broken. And so, even as Earth bled, even as its skies turned black with smoke, the strike wings rose again. Their engines roared, their fire burned, and their message echoed louder than ever. We may fall, we may die, but we will never kneel. The price of defiance was heavy, but it was a price humanity was willing to pay. Because freedom once taken could never be given back. The Scale Dominion had thought Earth would be a quick conquest, a small fire to stamp out. But after months of battle, their fleets were no longer hunters. They were prey. It began quietly. A convoy of Scale supply ships vanished near the asteroid belts. No distress calls, no wreckage, nothing. Only silence. At first the warlords dismissed it. A navigation error, perhaps pirates. But then it happened again. And again. Soon whispers filled their fleets. The humans are hunting us. The strike wings had taken the war beyond Earth's skies. No longer content to defend their home, the pilots carried the fight into the void. They studied the paths of the Dominion's ships, waited in shadows, and struck without warning. When the scale thought themselves safe in deep space, humanity appeared. When they hid in nebulae, hoping the thick clouds would shield them, humanity dove in after them. When they fled into warp lanes, Earth's jets followed, harassing them until their engines burned out. Everywhere the scale ran, the strike wings were there, relentless, merciless, patient. The hunters had become the hunted. For the first time in centuries, the Dominion's commanders felt fear. On Earth, the people called it justice. Every destroyed scale ship was a memory avenged. Every wreck drifting in space was a message. We have not forgotten. We will not forgive. Children who had lost parents pointed to the sky and smiled when they heard news of another ambush. Families lit candles in windows believing their dead were watching, proud that humanity had risen. But for the pilots, the hunt was not glory. It was necessity. They were tired, broken, and scarred. Their faces carried the weight of sleepless nights. Their bodies bore the marks of wounds and burns. Some had flown so many missions that they could no longer count, and yet they returned to the cockpit every time, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. The Dominion warlords could not understand such resolve. They ruled by fear and greed. They could not imagine fighting for love, for memory, for survival, and so they were blind to what was coming. The strike wings grew sharper with each battle. They learned the weaknesses of scale ships, the patterns of their patrols, the flaws in their sensors. Where other species saw an unstoppable empire, humans saw cracks, and into those cracks they struck again and again until even the mightiest warships trembled. Soon Skyle fleets stopped advancing. They began to retreat. They hid in fortified positions, too afraid to move through open space. They called for reinforcements, begged for more warships, demanded more weapons, but none of it mattered. Humanity was not building an empire. Humanity was not spreading across the stars. Humanity was simply hunting, and the galaxy was watching. Worlds enslaved by the Skyle began to whisper. Could it be true? Could the Dominion bleed? Could the thrones of their masters fall? For so long no one had dared resist. But now, far away, a small blue planet was striking fear into the most powerful warlords the galaxy had ever known. Hope spread like fire in dry grass. The scale tried to crush that hope with lies. They called humanity reckless. They promised their empire was eternal. But the sight of burning flagships told a different story. The wreckage floating in the stars was proof enough. For the Dominion, the hunt was humiliation. For humanity, it was survival. For the galaxy, it was a miracle. In one battle near the shattered rings of a broken world, a single human wing ambushed a fleet 10 times its size. They darted through debris, used broken rocks as cover, and tore the scale apart piece by piece. When the smoke cleared, the fleet was gone and the humans still flew. The story spread like wildfire. A world too small to matter had broken the unbreakable. And so the legend of the strike wings grew. No longer was Earth seen as silent or weak. It was a storm sweeping through the stars, a storm that hunted its enemies without rest. The Dominion was bleeding, its fleets shrinking, its warlords arguing among themselves, and deep in their dark halls, the rulers of the Skyle began to tremble. For they had never faced an enemy like humanity, an enemy that did not conquer, but hunted. An enemy that did not fear death, but embraced sacrifice, an enemy that once roused, could not be stopped. The hunt had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. The galaxy had always feared the Skyle Dominion. For centuries, their fleets had ruled like shadows over the stars. Kingdoms bent their knees, worlds paid tribute, and thrones bowed in silence whenever the scale came. To resist them was to vanish. To fight them was to be erased. That was the law of the galaxy, but then came Earth. At first, no one believed it. Rumors of human resistance were dismissed as lies or at best as exaggerations. How could one small planet stand against an empire that had swallowed 100 worlds? But as months turned into years, the rumors did not fade. They grew louder. Stories of shattered fleets and burning flagships reached even the deepest corners of the stars. The galaxy listened and trembled. On distant thrones, rulers shifted uncomfortably. In grand palaces, advisors whispered in fear. If the Skyle could be beaten, what did it mean for the rest of them? What if humanity did not stop with the Dominion? What if those wings of fire one day came for them? For centuries, empires had mocked Earth as primitive. Now those same empires sent spies to watch. Reports came back of strike wings that moved like storms, of pilots who flew with no fear of death, of a people who fought not for power but for survival. The rulers of the stars could not understand it, and that was what made it terrifying. For power, they understood. For greed, they understood. But for love, for grief, for hope, that was something beyond their reach. And so one by one, the thrones of the galaxy began to tremble. Even allies of the Scale grew cautious. Some withdrew their soldiers. Some stopped sending tribute. Some secretly prayed for humanity to finish what they themselves had been too afraid to start. The Dominion, once an empire no one dared to question, was now alone, its allies doubting, its enemies watching, its strength slipping away. But still, the Skyle warlords refused to admit weakness. They gathered fleets greater than anything Earth had yet faced. They swore to crush humanity once and for all, to wipe their wings of fire from the stars. The strike wings met them without hesitation. The battles were larger, fiercer, more brutal than anything before. Whole regions of space turned into graveyards of wreckage. Stars themselves seemed to burn brighter with the fury of the fight, and still humanity refused to kneel. They fought in the dark of asteroid fields, they fought in the glow of shattered moons, they fought in the silence between worlds. And again, the Scale bled. The galaxy could hardly believe its eyes. No one had ever defied the Dominion like this. No one had ever made them retreat. Yet here was Earth, a single world, forcing warlords to beg for reinforcements, forcing fleets to hide in strongholds, forcing thrones to shiver in fear. In every empire, rulers began to ask the same question. If Earth can bring the Scale to their knees, what will happen to us if their wings ever turn our way? Some tried to send secret messages to humanity, offers of friendship, alliances whispered in shadows. But humanity did not answer. They had no interest in thrones or crowns. Their message was written only in the wreckage of their enemies. We will fight if you come for us. We will rise if you try to break us. For the people of Earth, this war was not about ruling the galaxy. It was about survival, about memory, about justice. But for the galaxy, watching from a distance, it was something more. It was a warning. The Skyle had once seemed like gods. Now they were hunted beasts. If gods could fall, then so could kings. If dominions could burn, then so could empires. And if humanity could rise from silence to strike terror into the most powerful warlords alive, then no throne was safe. The galaxy trembled, because it was no longer the Skyle alone who feared humanity. It was everyone. The Scale Dominion had always been proud. Their warlords ruled like gods, their voices carrying across galaxies, their fleets feared by all. For generations they believed themselves untouchable. No enemy had ever forced them to kneel. No battle had ever turned their thrones to dust. But humanity was different. The strike wings had torn holes in their pride. Every battle ended with more wreckage drifting in the stars, more fleets shattered, more soldiers broken. For the first time in memory, the Dominion was not advancing. It was retreating. And the warlords, who once stood tall in arrogance, now argued and shouted like frightened men. Some demanded stronger fleets, more weapons, harsher punishment for failure. Others whispered of peace, their voices shaking. They had never known fear, but now it lived inside them, growing stronger with every report of human victories. One by one, their mighty flagships became tombs, Strike wings struck not at the center of fleets but at their leaders, hunting the warlords themselves. When a warlord fell, the Dominion trembled. Soldiers who had once shouted oaths of loyalty now fled. Captains abandoned ships. The empire that had seemed eternal was cracking. For the people of Earth, each fallen warlord was more than just a victory. It was justice. These were the monsters who had burned their cities, stolen their families, and filled the skies with fire. Now those same monsters were running, begging, hiding behind the very slaves they had once commanded. The galaxy watched in disbelief. Never before had the scale shown weakness. Never before had they begged. Yet here they were, warlords pleading for mercy, voices breaking with fear. They tried to bribe their enemies. They tried to promise peace. They even tried to hide behind lies, claiming they had never wanted this war. But humanity did not listen. The strike wings carried with them the memories of every scream, every grave, every child buried in rubble. They did not fight for negotiation. They did not fight for treaties. They fought to end the Dominion, and so the warlords fell one after another. The great throne worlds of the scale began to burn. Palaces that had stood for thousands of years crumbled under fire. Statues of conquerors toppled into dust. Thrones once carved from the bones of the conquered lay empty, silent, forgotten. The soldiers of the Dominion had been taught that their empire could never die. Now they saw it dying before their eyes. They saw their leaders trembling, saw the wings of Earth striking again and again, saw their proud banners burning in the void. Some surrendered, some fled, others fought with desperation, but their strength was gone. For humanity, the cost was still heavy. Pilots continued to fall. Families continued to grieve. But with every sacrifice, the storm grew stronger. With every name carved into stone, the fire in Earth's heart blazed brighter. The Dominion could not understand it, how a broken people could rise stronger with each wound. That mystery became the weapon that destroyed them. The galaxy whispered of thrones doomed. Ancient rulers who had once mocked Earth now sat in silence, too afraid to speak. They feared that their own empires would be next. They feared that humanity, once awakened, could never be stopped. But humanity was not seeking crowns. They were not chasing thrones. They were not building an empire. They wanted only to end the terror, to destroy the ones who had come to enslave them. And so, as the warlords begged and the Dominion fractured, Earth's message grew louder than ever. We will never bow. We will never forgive. And we will never stop. By the end of the campaign, the mighty scale Dominion was no longer a storm sweeping across the galaxy. It was a shattered shadow, its warlords gone, its fleets broken, its name spoken only in fear. Humanity had done the impossible. They had taken the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known and brought it to its knees. The thrones of the scale were doomed, and the galaxy trembled, wondering who would be next. The last warlord of the scale Dominion died not with a roar but with a whisper. His flagship burned in silence, drifting in the endless dark. Around it floated the broken pieces of an empire that had once ruled galaxies. For humanity, it was the end of a nightmare, but also the beginning of something greater. When the final battle ended, the pilots of Earth did not cheer. They sat in silence inside their strike wings, their eyes heavy with exhaustion. So many names had been lost. So many voices would never return. Every victory had been bought with blood. Every step forward had been paid for with sacrifice. Admiral Kalen, standing on the bridge of Earth's flagship, looked out at the ruins. His voice was soft when he spoke. They thought we would bow. They thought we would break. But we endured, and now the galaxy will remember. His officers nodded, some with tears in their eyes. They were not rulers, not conquerors. They were survivors. And yet they had done what no empire had ever done. They had shattered the scale. News spread faster than light. Across the galaxy, slaves once bound in chains tore down their masters' banners. Whole planets celebrated, their skies filled with cries of freedom. Where once the Dominion had cast fear, now hope began to rise. The galaxy whispered a new phrase. The humans have awakened, but Earth did not claim thrones. Humanity did not raise crowns above their heads. Instead, they rebuilt. Cities that had been scarred by fire were raised again. Families found each other in the ruins, holding on tighter than before. The people remembered their dead, honored their pilots, and swore never to forget the cost of survival. The strike wings, once forged in desperation, now became guardians. No longer were they only hunters of warlords, they became shields for the weak. Wherever remnants of the Dominion tried to rise again, the wings struck swiftly, reminding them that the age of cruelty was over. And yet beyond the ashes, a question lingered. What now? Humanity had proven its strength. The galaxy watched them with fear and awe. Some rulers whispered of alliances. Others spoke in trembling voices of preparing for war against Earth before it grew too strong. But those who had seen the fire in human eyes knew the truth. This was not a people who wanted to conquer. This was a people who wanted only to live free. Still, the galaxy trembled. The memory of the Dominion's fall was too fresh. The sight of warlords begging, of thrones burning, of an empire crushed, it haunted them. If humanity could do that to the Skull, what could they do to others? But humanity had no crown to wear, no throne to build. Instead, they carried something far stronger: memory. The pilots who had fallen lived on in every flight. The cities that had burned lived on in every rebuilt street. The pain of Earth's first invasion had become a promise that would never be broken again. Generations later, when children asked why the stars were safe, the elders would tell them the story of the day invaders came with fire, and of how Earth answered with fire greater still. They would tell of strike wings unleashed, of warlords hunted, of empires trembling, of thrones doomed, and they would speak the words that had carried humanity through every battle. We will never bow, we will never forgive, and we will never stop. On the ruins of the last throne world, flowers grew through cracked stone. Pilots stood there in silence, their hands touching the earth, their helmets tucked under their arms. They did not speak of vengeance. They spoke of home, of peace, of the families waiting under blue skies. Humanity had walked through fire and come out stronger. The galaxy would never be the same. The dawn after fire had come, and at its heart stood Earth, scarred, unbroken, eternal.